Hi, this is Ken Stiles, the Pragmatic Professor, and I'm offering some advice and insights based on my 35 years of college teaching. Now, something that is often jarring to college students when they walk into class and look at the syllabus is to realize that college professors have an awful lot of latitude when it comes to designing the course readings, the syllabus, and so forth. That's because as professionals, they don't really need a lot of oversight. At least they don't think they do. You don't have school boards, you don't have panels, you don't have parents looking over the shoulder of the teachers, telling them what to teach. Instead, the faculty usually get to pretty much design the course as they see fit. Okay? The result of that is that there isn't as much filtering of readings. Okay, now some of that is by design, in the sense that the instructor might want you to read some material that he knows is not necessarily the best stuff. Okay, as a way of sparking a discussion and getting you to exercise your critical thinking skills. So the instructor will probably go over this material in class, but in the meantime, you should be thinking about this. Anytime you read something, ask yourself at least these four questions. What's the logic behind what the author is doing? Does it make sense? Are there any logical fallacies in play here? What about bias? Does the author always say the same thing regardless of the evidence? Right? Does the author have some agenda? What are the motivations, financial or otherwise? So these are some things to think about in trying to identify poor scholarship. It's also good for identifying bad news stories or other information that you might find on social media. So we'll start with logic. Now there is a long list of what they call logical fallacies. I recommend to all college students a basic course in logic. Usually it's an introductory philosophy course of some sort. Because most of us haven't been trained to think systematically, methodically about this sort of thing. But for example, a lot of times you'll see scholars that make sweeping generalizations that say such and such is always the case, right? Or never the case. Well, the fact is the world is complicated and there are always exceptions. And so be suspicious of sweeping generalizations. A non sequitur is basically a statement that doesn't have logical support. It's just dangling out there as an assertion that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Are there missing factors? Omitted variables is the term that we use in the social sciences. But basically, are they explaining something with just one or two elements when you can kind of think through that there may be four or five other reasonable factors that could explain the outcome? Ad hominem attacks. The argument is wrong because the person who said them is a jerk, right? Well, we know that's not the case. There are all sorts of jerks who have great ideas, and a lot of nice people who have stupid ideas. So when you see ad hominem attacks, that's a red flag, okay? On the other hand, to say that because such and such powerful person said it, it must be true, well, there again, you have to look at the idea, look at the proposition on its own merits, and not really pay that much attention to who it was who said the thing. So these are just a few logical fallacies you want to watch for in identifying bad scholarship. The bias issue is considerable, right? A lot of faculty already know the answer to the question before they start the research. For that matter, a lot of students have this problem too. Journalists, politicians, policymakers, a lot of folks know what the answer is before they gather the evidence. This is a problem, okay? Don't be guilty of that and be quick to identify cases of other people doing that. One of the ways that you can test this is to ask whether the person has ever changed his or her mind based on new evidence. People get frustrated with Dr. Fauci, for example, because the advice that he gave 4 months ago is a little different than the advice he gives today. This is, I'm speaking in August of 2020. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we're learning more about the COVID virus. So one would hope that opinions will change over time. Okay. Again, is the author speaking in absolutes, or is there some wiggle room in the argument? That might be a sign of whether the person is speaking from a bias or trying to be objective. Now, the evidence that you'll see can also be picked at. If the evidence is really just a few anecdotes, and then a sweeping generalization is drawn from those anecdotes, that's a red flag. That's a problem. It depends on what you're trying to say, of course, but if you're trying to draw general conclusions about a whole population or a whole historical period, then you can't get away with just a few anecdotes. If you do, you should acknowledge that your evidence is weak. Okay. False analogies is a problem. We often try to compare two things because we know how one thing worked and we think that the new thing is like the other thing. But if we get it wrong, if we misconstrue some basic elements of the analogy, that can actually be very misleading. You know, to say that World War II is like World War I, no, that's not really very accurate, and it's certainly not very helpful. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And finally, are there disclaimers? Does the author acknowledge that the evidence may not be as strong as she would like? This is actually a good thing. You want a little modesty and humility among scholars. You don't want them to be asserting things that they can't back up. It's kind of like a lawyer in a courtroom. You know, if you know the person ran over somebody with a car, but you're not sure whether it was deliberate, then don't go for murder one. You know, go for manslaughter or something that you can actually prove. Peer review is one of those things that's a little controversial. It is possible for a whole field to be wrong, right? 100 some years ago, all anthropologists were kind of racist in the sense that they broke people down into racial classifications and ranked them with white folks on the top and different races down below. So they were kind of all wrong. That's gone out the window. The good thing about peer review is eventually, I think, the truth prevails in the sense that bad ideas usually get identified. So you want peer review. You don't want somebody to just be writing something on his or her own. You want to subject it to some scrutiny from people who don't have a vested interest. And speaking of vested interest, this is something you want to consider, right? When you read a study, especially one that's published by some research institute or a corporation or even a university, you might want to ask yourself, are they slanting the findings in order to please their donors or their funders? Does this have, do the conclusions have an impact on their bottom line? What about their power and status? Maybe their political office. You always want to watch for people slanting evidence in a particular direction because their careers or their wealth or their status are going to benefit from doing that. So just look at it. You know, take a look at the source. If you're studying the effects of cigarette smoking and the study is published by the Tobacco Institute, probably want to set that aside. It's probably not going to be very useful. And it's always possible for people with bad intentions and poor methodologies to accidentally come up with some really interesting findings. It's kind of like a broken clock being right twice a day. But watch for people using good, clear logic, not slipping into logical fallacies, not showing a lot of bias, but trying to be objective and motivated for the sake of knowledge itself. And then using the evidence correctly and not trying to overstate their claims. And that'll help you identify bad research and make you smarter in the process. So this is Ken Stiles, the Pragmatic Professor, Wishing you all the best.
So thanks for watching. Hope that was helpful to you. Make sure to comment and like and share and watch for other videos. And of course, the views expressed are my own and not necessarily those of any institutions with which I've been affiliated over the years. Take care. Bye-bye.